Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Maria welcoming you to our Sunday CME. First of all, let me remind you to fill up the pre-test and submit it before the lecture. Today, we have an expert in obstetric and gynecology to speak to us about antepartum hemorrhage. Dr. Farkhanda has a total of 17 years of experience in her field of expertise after getting her licenses from Pakistan and United Arab Emirates. She has worked under several private and government hospitals. To mention, as a specialist registrar in German Hospital in Dubai and Dar Al Shifa Hospital in Abu Dhabi. She is an expert on the management of various obstetric and gynecologic problems, which include OB medical emergencies, diagnostic procedures, as well as surgical treatments involving gynecologic problems. Please welcome Dr. Farkhanda to talk on antepartum hemorrhage. Good morning, Dr. Farkhanda.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for such a nice, detailed introduction. Today I'm Dr. Farhanda, specialist obstetrician gynecologist in Ahliya Hospital, Hamdani Street, Abu Dhabi. And today I'm going to present antepartum hemorrhage. So, the learning objective of my presentation is what is the definition of the antepartum hemorrhage, what are the causes of antepartum hemorrhage, what are the complications, how to do clinical assessment patients with the antepartum hemorrhage, what are the pertinent investigations, and how to do management of such cases. Antepartum hemorrhage. Antepartum hemorrhage defined as bleeding of the genital tract occurring from 24 weeks of gestation until birth. Antepartum hemorrhage complicates between 2 to 5% of all pregnancies. Obstetric hemorrhage remains one of the major causes of maternal death in developing countries and is the cause of up to 50% of estimated 500,000 maternal deaths that occur globally each year. Obstetric hemorrhage encompasses both antepartum and postpartum bleeding. Now, what are the causes of antepartum hemorrhage? The causes of antepartum hemorrhage vary and include placental abruption, placenta previa, uterine rupture, and vasa previa. Other causes also include placenta accreta spectrum, cervical lesions such as polyp or ectropion, infections, trauma, or malignancy. It is not uncommon to fail to identify a cause of antepartum hemorrhage when it is then described as unexplained antepartum hemorrhage. So what are the complications? The potential complications include maternal anemia, hypovolemic shock, renal tubular necrosis, consumptive coagulopathy, postpartum hemorrhage, and even death. The fetal complications could be premature birth. Up to 20% of very preterm births are associated with antepartum hemorrhage, fetal hypoxia and its sequelae, and intrauterine death. These are some pictures of causes of antepartum hemorrhage, which are showing placental abruption, cervical lesions, placenta previa, vasa previa, and uterine rupture. How to do clinical assessment patient with antepartum hemorrhage? The clinical assessment in women presenting with antepartum hemorrhage is to establish whether urgent intervention is required to manage maternal or fetal compromise. There are some definition of hemorrhage. Minor hemorrhage means blood loss less than 50 ml that has settled. Major hemorrhage, blood loss of 52,000 ml with no signs of clinical shock. Massive hemorrhage, blood loss greater than 1,000 ml and or signs of clinical shock. However, there are no definitions of the severity of antepartum hemorrhage. It is recognized that the amount of blood loss is often underestimated and that the amount of bleeding coming from the enteritis may not represent the total blood loss. For example, in a concealed placenta abruption. The process of triage includes history taking to assess pain, assessment of vaginal bleeding, the cardiovascular condition of the mother, and an assessment of fetal well-being. Women presenting with acute bleeding, or if the woman is unable to provide a history due to a compromised clinical state, should have an immediate assessment of maternal well-being and resuscitation should be started. The mother is the priority in this situation and should be stabilized prior to establishing the fetal condition. If there is no maternal compromise, a full history should be taken, including onset and duration of bleeding and associated symptoms, including pain, shortness of breath, dizziness. Placenta abruption should be considered when pain is continuous. Labor should be considered if the pain is intermittent. If the antepartum hemorrhage is associated with spontaneous or iatrogenic rupture of fetal membrane, and the dark bleeding from a ruptured vasa previa should be considered. Risk factors for abruption of placenta previa should be identified. The woman should be asked about her awareness of fetal movements. Attempts should be made to auscultate the fetal heart. Previous cervical ischemia history is useful in order to assess the possibility of a neoplastic lesion of the cervix as the cause of antepartum hemorrhage. Now, the examination of the woman. The examination of the woman should be performed to assess the amount and the cause of the antepartum hemorrhage. The basic principles of resuscitation should be adhered to in all women presenting with collapse or major hemorrhage. The primary survey should follow the structured approach of airway, breathing, and circulation. Following initial assessment and commencement of resuscitation, cause for hemorrhage or collapse should be sought. All women presenting with antepartum hemorrhage should have their pulse and blood pressure recorded. Abdominal palpation. The woman should be assessed for tenderness or signs of an acute abdomen. The tense or woody feel to the uterus on abdominal palpation indicate a significant abruption. Abdominal palpation may also reveal uterine contraction. A soft, non-tender uterus may suggest a lower genital tract cause or bleeding from placenta previa or vasa previa. Speculum examination. Speculum examination can be useful to identify cervical dilatation or visualize a lower genital tract cause for the antepartum hemorrhage. It can allow for quantifying blood loss and identify ongoing active bleeding. What is the role of digital vaginal examination? Digital vaginal examination should not be performed until placenta previa is ruled out by ultrasound. So if placenta previa is a possible diagnosis, for example, a previous scan shows a low placenta, or there is high presenting part on abdominal examination, or the bleeding has been painless, digital vaginal examination should not be performed until an ultrasound excludes the placenta previa. But digital vaginal examination can provide information on cervical dilatation if antepartum is not because of the placenta previa and it is associated with pain and uterine contractions. Investigation. The maternal investigations performed will depend on the amount of bleeding. Ultrasound can be used to diagnose placenta previa but does not exclude abruption. Placental abruption is a clinical diagnosis. Blood test. In case of major or massive hemorrhage, blood should be analyzed for full blood count, coagulation screen, for units of blood cross-match, urea electrolyte and liver function test should be assessed. However, in minor hemorrhage, a full blood count, group and SAVE should be performed. A coagulation screen normally not indicated until the platelet count is abnormal. In all women who are Rh negative, a Klein-Hort Betke test should be performed to quantify fetal maternal hemorrhage to gauge the dose of anti-T immunoglobulin. Fetal monitoring. An assessment of fetal heart rate should be performed, usually with a cardiotocography in women presenting with antepartum hemorrhage once the mother is stable or resuscitation has commenced, to aid decision making on the mode of delivery. Ultrasound should be carried out to establish fetal heart pulsation if fetal viability cannot be detected using external auscultation. In the context of suspected vasa previa, various tests exist that can differentiate between fetal and maternal blood, but are often not applicable in acute situations. Antenatal management. Women presenting with spotting or who are no longer bleeding and bleeding has settled and where placenta previa has been excluded can go home after reassuring initial clinical assessment. All women with antepartum hemorrhage heavier than spotting and women with ongoing bleeding should remain in hospital at least until the bleeding has stopped. Each woman must be assessed on an individual basis and clinical judgment applied. For example, if a woman presents with spotting and has a past history of intrauterine fetal death due to placental abruption, then hospitalization would be appropriate. Antenatal management, clinician should offer a single course of antenatal corticosteroid to women between 24 to 34 weeks and 6 days gestation at a risk of preterm birth. In women presenting with spotting, where the most likely cause is the lower genital tract bleeding, where imminent delivery is unlikely, corticosteroids are of little benefit but could still be considered. Anti-D immunoglobulin should be given to all non-sensitized Rh negative women after any presentation with antepartum hemorrhage. In the non-sensitized Rh negative women, in the event of recurrent vaginal bleeding after 20 weeks of gestation, anti-D immunoglobulin should be given at a minimum of 6 weekly intervals. In the non-sensitized Rh negative women, for all events after 20 weeks of gestation, at least 500 international units anti-D should be given, followed by a test to identify fetal-maternal hemorrhage greater than 4 ml red blood cells. Therefore, thereafter, additional anti-D immunoglobulin should be given as required. Women receiving antenatal anticoagulant therapy should be advised that if they have any vaginal bleeding, they should not take any more doses of anticoagulant. They should attend hospital urgently, and further doses should only be administered after consultation with medical staff. Tocolysis. Tocolysis for women presenting with symptomatic placenta previa or a low-lying placenta may be considered for 48 hours to facilitate administration of antenatal corticosteroids. However, tocolysis should not be used to delay delivery in a woman presenting with a major antepartum hemorrhage or who is hemodynamically unstable, or if there is evidence of fetal compromise. If the mother fetus is compromised, a cesarean section is appropriate method of delivery with concurrent resuscitation of the mother. If fetal death is diagnosed, vaginal birth is the recommended mode of delivery for most women, provided the maternal condition is stable, but cesarean birth will need to be considered for some cases. Postpartum hemorrhage should be anticipated in women who have experienced antepartum hemorrhage. Women with antepartum hemorrhage resulting from placental abruption or placenta previa should be strongly recommended to receive active management of third stage of labor. And consideration should be given to the use of ergometrin oxytocin to manage the third stage of labor in the absence of hypertension. The management of massive antepartum hemorrhage should follow locally multidisciplinary protocols. The management team should include a consultant obstetrician, anesthetist, hematologist, and midwifery labor ward coordinator. Laboratory staff and porting staff should be alerted. In women who have experienced a massive blood loss or a major abruption, the development of a disseminated intravascular coagulation should be considered. Clotting studies and a platelet count should be urgently requested, and advice from a hematologist sought. Up to 4 units of FFP and 10 units of precipitate may be given while awaiting the result of a coagulation studies. Major or massive antepartum hemorrhage may result in fetal anemia and fetal compromise. Therefore, the neonate should be assessed by a senior pediatrician or neonatologist. The postnatal management of pregnancy is complicated by major or massive antepartum hemorrhage, include thromboprophylaxis, debriefing, and clinical incident reporting. Now, how to manage massive antepartum hemorrhage? Management of massive antepartum hemorrhage, blood loss more than 1000 ml and clinical shock. When managing a woman with an antepartum hemorrhage with significant blood loss, it is crucial that the multidisciplinary team is involved and that senior help is sought early. Resuscitation. Management should follow the A, B, C, D pathway. A and B assess airway and breathing. A high concentration oxygen 10 to 15 liters per minute via face mask should be administered. Circulation. Establish 2 14 gauge intravenous lines. A 20 ml blood sample should be taken and sent for tests including full blood count and assessment of fetal-maternal hemorrhage if Rh negative women. Coagulation screen should be performed, urea electrolytes and cross-matching at least 4 units. D means assess fetus and decide for delivery. Arrest bleeding by delivery of the fetus. Maternal position should be left lateral tilt. Keep the women warm using appropriate available measures. Transfuse blood as soon as possible. Until blood is available, infuse up to 3.5 liter of warm clear fluid. Initially 2 liter from isotonic Crisplide. Further fluid resuscitation can continue with additional isotonic Crisplide or Colite as rapidly as required. The base equipment available should be used to achieve rapid warm infusion of fluid. Special blood filters should not be used as they slow infusion. Monitor temperature every 15 minutes, continuous pulse, blood pressure recording and respiratory rate using oximeter, electrocardiogram and automated blood pressure recording. Police catheter to monitor urine output. If immediate transfusion is indicated, give emergency ORAT negative red cells unit. Switch to group specific red cells as soon as possible. If prothrombin time or activated partial thromboplastin time are prolonged and hemorrhage is ongoing, administer 12 to 15 ml per kg of FFP. If hemorrhage continues after 4 units of red blood cells and hemostatic tests are unavailable, administer empirically 4 units of FFP. Administer 1 pool of platelets if hemorrhage is ongoing and platelet count is less than 75 into 10 to the power 9 per liter. Administer 2 pools of cryoprecipitate if hemorrhage is ongoing and fibrinogen less than 2 gram per liter. The main therapeutic goal for management of massive blood loss is to maintain hemoglobin more than 8 grams per deciliter, platelet count more than 50 into 10 to the power 9 per liter, prothrombin time less than 1.5 times normal, activated partial thromboplastin plastin time less than 1 times normal, fibrinogen more than 2 grams per liter. Delivery. Resuscitation and cesarean or induction of labor can occur simultaneously. The doctor should not wait for the resuscitation to be completed before the delivery process has begun. Once a decision has been made for cesarean section, this should be undertaken urgently. Early recourse to hysterectomy is recommended, especially where bleeding is associated with placenta accreta or uterine rupture, or when bleeding continues after a trial of intrauterine balloon tamponade. Hysterectomy should not be delayed until the woman is in extremis or while less definitive procedure with which the surgeon has little experience are attempted. Third stage management. In patients who present with antepartum hemorrhage, there is a risk of postpartum hemorrhage. Risk factors for PPH include uncorrected DIC, quiliary uterus with impaired ability to contract. Prophylactic measures to protect against PPH include correction of the DIC, make sure that patient is euvolemic and blood loss has been adequately replaced. Central venous pressure is 5 to 10 millimeter of mercury, oxytocin infusion, uterotonics according to local protocols, active manipulation, rubbing of the uterus after delivery, and remember to keep the patient warm. Now, we are going to talk about placental abruption. Placental abruption is defined as the premature separation of the normal-sighted placenta from the uterus. Abruption is usually an unanticipated emergency. Bleeding is often concealed. Therefore, vigilance is essential. The perinatal mortality rate for placenta abruption has found to be as high as 48%. The risk factors of placenta abruptions are previous history of abruption, folic acid deficiency, cocaine, cigarette smoking, hypertension, eclampsia toxemia, thrombophilia, premature rupture of the membrane, advanced maternal age, history of first trimester bleeding, pregnancy following assisted reproductive techniques. This is a picture of revealed placental abruption and concealed placental abruption. This is a picture of quiliary uterus where retroplacental blood penetrating through the thickness of the uterine wall. Placental abruption. Bleeding begins in the decidua basalis and leads to the separation of the placenta from its attachment to the uterine wall. This separation can be partial and self-limiting or can extend until there is fetal hypoxia and ultimately demise. Blood can be seen at the vagina. It tracks down the uterus between the membranes and the uterine wall. The blood can extend into the myometrium, quiliary uterus, which become weakened and can rupture during contractions. A quiliary uterus may contract poorly and contribute to postpartum hemorrhage. Placenta abruption is a clinical diagnosis on examination of placenta post-delivery. Ultrasound should not be used in the diagnosis of placenta abruption, but it is useful to confirm fetal viability or death and exclude a placenta previa. The features of placenta abruptions are vaginal bleeding. However, the bleeding can be concealed, revealed, or mixed. Abdominal pain usually constant in contrast to uterine contraction due to infiltration of blood into the myometrium. There would be fetal distress in 65% of cases or intrauterine death in 15% of cases. Evidence of disseminated intravascular coagulation non-clotting vaginal bleeding, bleeding from dripped sites, and skin bruising. Maternal circulatory shock depends on volume of blood loss, which can be concealed. Laboratory studies are full blood count, blood group, and cross-match at least 4 to 6 units of blood cross-match. Urea, creatinine, the hypervolemic condition with significant abruption affect renal function. Electrolytes levels should be monitored, particularly potassium level, which may rise with renal failure and blood transfusion and liver function test. Fibrinogen concentration should be measured. Fibrinogen level of less than 200 milligram per deciliter or 2 gram per liter suggests that the patient has a severe abruption. Prothrombin time activated partial thromboplastin time may be prolonged in case of severe placenta abruption indicating coagulopathy. Clear-heart test help determine the volume of fetal blood transfused into the maternal circulation, allow for the correct dose of anti-T to be calculated. The use of imaging in emergency situation is not advised as the diagnosis of placenta abruption should be based on clinical findings. The complications of placenta abruptions are maternal and fetal. Maternal complications are anemia, hypovolemic shock secondary to hemorrhage, coagulopathy, disseminated intravascular coagulation, acute renal failure, puerperal uterus, postpartum hemorrhage, ischemic necrosis of distal organs, adrenal or pituitary gland, fetal-maternal hemorrhage, psychological sequelae, and death. Fetal complication could include intrauterine death, hypoxia and its sequelae, anemia, fetal growth restriction if chronic abruption, risk of preterm birth. Management of placental abruption. The management of placental abruption will depend on gestation, the mother's cardiovascular status, and any fetal compromise. When minor abruption occur at or near term and maternal and fetal condition is reassuring, conservative management is reasonable. The goal is of achieving a vaginal delivery. However, not to perform a cesarean section with a live fetus is a difficult decision, as complete separation of the placenta and fetal death could occur rapidly. If there is evidence of maternal fetal compromise and delivery is not imminent, delivery by cesarean section is recommended. If there is fetal demise in the case of placenta abruption and mother is hemodynamically stable, there is a case of proceeding with vaginal delivery. In the case of massive placenta abruption, cesarean section may be indicated even if the fetus is dead to allow rapid control of the hemorrhage. Now we are going to talk about placenta previa. The term placenta previa should be used when the placenta lies directly over the internal os. For pregnancies at more than 16 weeks of gestation, the term low-lying placenta should be used when the placental age is less than 20 mm from the internal os on transabdominal or transvaginal scanning. The estimated incidence of placenta previa at term is 1 in 200 pregnancies. Routine ultrasound examination in pregnancy has shown that low implantation of placenta occurs in 5 to 28% of pregnancies during the second trimester. But as the uterus grows, the placental side often migrate upward so that only 3% of pregnancies are previa at term. This is the picture of minor degree placenta and major degree of placenta previa. The risk factors for placenta previa are advanced maternal age, multiparity, cigarette smoking, previous placenta previa, previous cesarean section, uterine scar, previous history of myomectomy, artificial reproductive techniques, and multiple pregnancies. Imaging for placenta previa. For pregnancies at more than 16 weeks of gestation, the placenta should be reported as low-lying when placental age is less than 20 mm from the internal os and as normal when the placental age is 20 mm or more than 20 mm from the internal os on TS or TVS. If the placenta is thought to be low-lying, less than 20 mm from the internal os or previa covering the os at the routine fetal anomaly scan, a follow-up ultrasound examination including a TVS recommended at 32 weeks of gestation to diagnose persistent low-lying placenta or placenta previa. In women with persistent low-lying placenta or placenta previa at 32 weeks of gestation who remain asymptomatic, an additional TVS is recommended at around 36 weeks of gestation to inform discussion about mode of delivery. Cervical length measurement may help facilitate management decisions in asymptomatic women with placenta previa. A short cervical length less than 25 mm on TVS before 34 weeks of gestation increases the risk of preterm emergency delivery and massive hemorrhage at cesarean section. This could be clinically useful when considering suitability for outpatient management. This is a picture of measurement of cervical length in case of placenta previa. The symptoms of placenta previa. For the majority of patients, they are asymptomatic. For those who have symptoms, the most prominent symptom is vaginal bleeding, which is painless, bright red, can vary in amount from spotting to life-threatening. The bleeding may be recurrent and could be provoked by sexual intercourse or the onset of labor. In 35% of cases, the fetus is malpositioned, breech, transverse, oblique, high head. Antenatal management in third trimester. Antenatal care needs to be tailored to individual women's needs and social circumstances. For example, distance between home and hospital, availability of transportation, previous bleeding episodes, hematology results. A discussion between the obstetrician and the woman is paramount. It should be made clear to any woman being treated at home in the third trimester that she should attend the hospital immediately if she experiences any bleeding, including spotting, contraction, or pain, including vague suprapubic period like X. Where hospital admission has been decided, an assessment of risk factor for venous thromboembolism in pregnancy should be performed. This will need to be balanced, the risk of developing a venous thromboembolism against the risk of bleeding from a placenta previa. Given there is a significant risk of bleeding at delivery, it is important to identify antenatal anemia and maximize blood count with iron supplementation. A single course of antenatal corticosteroid therapy is recommended between 34 to 35 weeks and 6 days gestation for pregnant women with a low-lying placenta or placenta previa and is appropriate prior to 34 weeks of gestation in women at high risk of preterm birth. Method of delivery for women with placenta previa. Caesarean section is the usual method of delivery if the leading placental age is within 20 mm from the internal os in third trimester. However, with low-lying placenta, vaginal birth may be attempted if the fetal head is below the leading age of the placenta, as the fetal head can access the birth canal without placental disruption. Timings of delivery. Delivery timing should be tailored according to the antenatal symptoms. For women presenting with uncomplicated placenta previa, delivery should be considered between 36 to 37 weeks of gestation. This may be earlier in cases of suspected placenta accreta spectrum. Indications for delivery before 37 weeks of gestation in a case of placenta previa are onset of labor, fetal distress, severe growth restriction, intrauterine death, or severe bleeding, which is threatening maternal health. Caesarean section in case of placenta previa. Cesarean section for placenta previa carries a risk of hemorrhage and preoperative planning essential. Following the confidential inquiry into 2007, a care bundle 6 element of care was developed. These are consultant obstetrician should be present and scrub and directly supervise delivery. Consultant anesthetist should be planned and directly supervise anesthetic at delivery. Blood and blood products should be readily available. Preoperative planning by the multidisciplinary team. Preoperative consent should include possible interventions such as hysterectomy, transfusion, placenta remaining in utero, cell salvage, uterine artery embolization, and interventional radiology. Women who decline blood products should be transferred to a unit where cell salvage and interventional radiology are available and a local availability of a level 2 critical care bed. Now we are going to talk about placenta accreta spectrum. Placenta accreta spectrum describes abnormally invasive placentation. Placenta accreta means chorionic villi attached directly to the myometrium in the absence of decidua basalis. Placenta increta means placenta villi invade into the myometrium but do not extend to the serosa of the uterus. Placenta percreta means chorionic villi penetrate through the myometrium up to the serosa. The new vascularization of placenta percreta may penetrate the adjacent organs like bladder, intestine, parametrium, or other neighboring tissue. This is the picture of placenta accreta spectrum, which showing normal sided placenta with on the decidua basalis, the placenta accreta which is invading attachment with the myometrium. increta which is invading the myometrium, and percreta which is invading the serosa. The risk factors for placenta accreta spectrum include history of accreta in a previous pregnancy, previous cesarean delivery, myomectomy. Other uterine surgery include repeated endometrial curettage, placenta previa, advanced maternal age, and ART. The incidence of placenta accreta has increased tenfold, most likely because of the corresponding increase in number of cesarean sections. Antenatal diagnosis. If there is previous history of cesarean delivery and the presence of an anterior placenta previa, it should raise suspicion for placenta accreta spectrum. Antenatal diagnosis of placenta accreta spectrum allows for greater surgical and anesthetic planning. The diagnostic value of ultrasound imaging and MRI in detecting placenta accreta spectrum has been found to be similar. However, MRI may be used to complement ultrasound imaging to assess the depth of invasion and lateral extension of myometrial invasion, especially with posterior placentation and or in women with ultrasound signs suggesting parametrial invasion. This is a picture of placenta percreta and placental vessels extending through the myometrium into the bladder. Antenatal care placenta accreta spectrum. For women who are suspected to have placenta accreta spectrum, multidisciplinary team management in a specialist center with expertise in managing invasive placentation is essential. Delivery should take place in a specialist center with immediate access to blood products, cell salvage, adult intensive care unit, and neonatal intensive care unit. Elective admissions from 34 weeks is advisable with administration of antenatal corticosteroids. Emergency contingency plans should be made and discussed with the patient in advance. Consent in case of placenta accreta spectrum. Any women with suspected placenta accreta spectrum should meet with a senior obstetrician. It is important to emphasize the risk associated with cesarean section in terms of massive obstetric hemorrhage, increased risk of lower urinary tract damage, hysterectomy, and the need for blood transfusion. Women should be informed that in cases of placenta previa and a previous cesarean section, the risk of cesarean hysterectomy is 27 out of 100. In case of placenta accreta spectrum, women should be informed that hysterectomy is highly likely. The main risk associated with the delivery of placenta accreta spectrum is massive hemorrhage and its associated complications such as coagulopathy, multisystem organ failure, and death. Many women with placenta accreta spectrum require massive blood transfusion. Delivery. Anesthesia for delivery, both general and regional anesthetic techniques have been shown to be safe. However, the women should be informed that the surgical procedure can be performed safely with regional anesthesia, but be advised that it may be necessary to convert to general anesthesia if required. For women with placenta accreta spectrum, planned delivery at 35 to 36 weeks gestation provides the best balance between fetal maturity and the risk of unscheduled delivery. The same preoperative bundle applies as placenta previa 6 elements of care. There is a potential place for prophylactic placement of balloon catheter in the iliac artery. This balloon tamponade is beneficial after delivery of the fetus to allow for surgical hemostasis to be achieved. This benefit need to be weighed up with the potential risk of complication including iliac artery thrombus or rupture. If there is concern of placenta percreta involving the bladder, preoperative cystoscopy and placement of ureteric stents is advised, owing to the risk of ureteric damage and the need for partial bladder resection in case of percreta. Surgical approach. Surgical planning preoperatively can be facilitated through the use of ultrasound and MRI. However, often decisions are made depending on the presentation upon visualizing the placenta and uterine cavity. In case where uterine preservation is unlikely, recourse to cesarean hysterectomy with the placenta left in situ is recommended. There is a place of uterine preservation surgery. However, this should only be attempted by surgeons working in teams with appropriate expertise to manage such cases and after appropriate counseling regarding risk. In a small number of cases after fetal delivery, placental separation is not attempted and subsequently left in situ. This may be due to the maternal wishes for uterine preservation. When the placenta is left in situ, local arrangement need to be made to ensure regular reviews, including ultrasound examination and access to emergency care should the woman experience any complication. Complication could be immediate sepsis, inadvertent partial separation of placenta leading to severe postpartum hemorrhage, or delayed secondary postpartum hemorrhage and sepsis. Prophylactic antibiotics may be helpful in immediate postpartum period to reduce risk of infective complication. Methotrexate adjuvant therapy should not be used for expectant management as it is of unproven benefit and has significant adverse effects. Undiagnosed placenta accreta spectrum. How are women with undiagnosed placenta accreta spectrum best managed at delivery? If at the time of an elective cesarean section where both mother and baby are stable, and if it is apparent that placenta accreta is present on opening the abdomen, the cesarean section should be delayed until the appropriate staff and resources has been assembled and adequate blood products are available. This may involve closure of the maternal abdomen and urgent transfer to a specialist unit for delivery. Now we are going to talk about vasa previa. Vasa previa is defined as fetal vessels crossing the internal cervical os through the free placental membrane. Unprotected by Barton's jelly or the umbilical cord, a vasa previa is likely to rupture during active labor or iatrogenically with artificial rupture of membrane. This can lead to fetal hemorrhage and death. The prevalence of vasa previa ranges from 1 in 1200 to 1 in 5000 pregnancies, and the associated fetal mortality rate is quite high, approximately 60%. Approximately 60% of women with vasa previa at delivery have a placenta previa or low-lying placenta. Types of vasa previa. There are two types of vasa previa. Type 1 occurs secondary to a filamentous cord insertion in 90% of cases. The unsupported umbilical blood vessels in filamentous placenta lie below the presenting part and run across the cervical os. Type 2 vasa previa occurs when fetal vessels connect two lobes of or more than two lobes of placenta. For example, when a suction turret lobe is present in 10% of cases. This is the diagrammatic presentation of vasa previa type 1, where filamentous cord insertion is below the presenting part, covering across the internal os. This is the vasa previa type 2, where two lobes of placenta joined by fetal vessels, fetal blood vessels. This is type 1 vasa previa. Risk factor associated with vasa previa. A risk factor that has been identified consistently for vasa previa is an in vitro fertilization, which may increase the risk for type 1 vasa previa to approximately 1 in 250. Other risk factors are placenta previa, multiple pregnancy. Diagnosis of vasa previa. In the absence of vaginal bleeding, vasa previa is occasionally detected intrapartum during vaginal examination when vessels are fed in the membrane. This may be confirmed using an amnioscope or ultrasound. Vasa previa can be diagnosed with a combination of both transabdominal and transvaginal color Doppler imaging. Transvaginal ultrasound has a reported sensitivity of 100% and specificity of 99.8% with color Doppler. Despite this, there is insufficient evidence to support universal screening in the routine fetal anomaly, as vasa previa is a rare condition. Vasa previa diagnosed in the second trimester resolved in approximately 20% of patients prior to delivery. Therefore, a repeat scan at 32 weeks is warranted. This is a picture of vasa previa, which is the fetal blood vessel running below the presenting part across the internal os. Management vasa previa in third trimester. In cases where vasa previa has diagnosed antenatally, the survival rate are over 95% owing to early elective delivery and inpatient management. RCOG recommends hospitalization from 30 to 32 weeks should be considered in particular cases of multiple pregnancies, history of antenatal bleeding, and threatened preterm labor. Elective delivery by cesarean section at 34 to 36 weeks with a course of antenatal corticosteroids from 32 weeks is reasonable. If there is bleeding from a known or suspected vasa previa, especially with suspected fetal compromise, delivery should be expedited by cesarean section. Management of vasa previa. in the presence of painless, dark, red vaginal bleeding associated with acute fetal compromise after spontaneous or artificial rupture of membrane or diagnosis by the previous should be considered with immediate action as fetal mortality is at least 60% despite urgent cesarean section. Neonatal resuscitation including the use of blood transfusion. Total blood loss volume at terms is approximately 80 to 100 ml per kg. Therefore, a relatively small amount of blood loss can have major implication for the fetus and is rapidly fatal. Now we are going to talk about uterine rupture. Uterine rupture is full thickness, loss of integrity of uterine muscles and serota, while uterine scar dehiscence does not involve the visceral peritoneum. Most cases of uterine rupture occur during labor following previous cesarean section or other uterine surgery such as myomectomy. The risk of scar rupture after one cesarean section is 1 in 200 women with spontaneous birth. However, this increases 2 to 3-fold with induction and augmentation of labor. Uterine rupture is rare with an unscarred uterus affecting 0.5 to 2 per 10,000. These are usually multiparous women. This is a picture of uterine rupture. Risk factors for uterine rupture are high parity, previous uterine surgery that breached the cavity, induction or augmentation of labor, hyperstimulation, malpresentation, macrosomia, uterine abnormalities, trauma including road traffic accident and obstetric maneuver. Signs and symptoms. Symptoms are often fairly non-specific and conventional signs may be absent as women may compensate well for massive concealed hemorrhage. For patients with a previous cesarean section, it is dreaded complication and signs and symptoms of rupture are monitored for very closely interpartum. These include abdominal pain between uterine contraction, cessation of uterine activity, particularly in second stage of labor, hematuria and blood-stained liquor. CTG abnormalities are associated with 55 to 87% of uterine rupture. Delivery. In case of suspected uterine rupture, stabilization of the mother and emergency delivery are crucial. Perimortem cesarean section. In the case of maternal collapse secondary to antepartum hemorrhage, the fetus and placenta should be delivered promptly to allow control of the hemorrhage. Perimortem cesarean section should be carried out within 4 minutes or as soon as possible after loss of spontaneous circulation in gestations upward of 20 weeks. This is an important step in maternal resuscitation as 12 to 15% of circulating blood volume at term supplies the uterus. Therefore, there is no need to confirm fetal viability. Emergency department recognize this thing and to carry out the cesarean section in whichever location. It is prudent to trigger the massive obstetric hemorrhage protocol in an undelivered woman at the time the decision to proceed to perimortem cesarean section is made. The neonatal team should be called early if a live delivery is likely, antepartum collapse over 22 weeks of gestation. Summary. Antepartum hemorrhage is a common complication in pregnancy associated with fetal and maternal morbidity and mortality. There are many causes, with the most serious being placental disorders such as placenta previa or accreta, which present with painful bleeding. Imaging may not always be the most appropriate course of action, but ultrasound is helpful commonly to investigate antepartum hemorrhage. The mainstay of management is to ensure hemodynamic stability of the patient and appropriately timed delivery of the fetus. It is important to identify patients who may be at risk of antepartum hemorrhage and plan their care on an individualized basis. Thank you very much. These are the references for my presentation. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farkanda. Yeah, that was a very extensive and excellent presentation. One of the most dreaded obstetric emergency, I believe, and this will keep your adrenaline rush to its maximum. Yeah,
Yes.
Dr. Farkanda has discussed the different causes of antepartum hemorrhage, which ranges from placenta previa, abruptio placenta, placenta accreta, uterine rupture, and then the least common would be Bassa previa, right?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
this is the
doctor.
least common. Yes.
Yeah, and it cannot be overemphasized that history and physical examination is very
Yes.
important, especially in abruptio placenta, wherein you don't have the time to get the diagnostic procedure, and even diagnostic procedure is not very useful
There's
during
no
this time.
diagnostic procedure.
Are
There's
there
no
any
free
questions?
cancel.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any questions from the floor? We have our other specialists in OB around. Do you have something to add? Actually, Dr. Farkanda has discussed practically everything from diagnosis and management. Okay, yeah. I have one question, doctor. Is in terms of abruptio placenta, would there be any risk factor in order to predict its possible occurrence in the future?
Yes, if patient having history of thrombophobia, if patient is having history of previous abruption, if patient is having history of pregnancy-induced hypertension, pre-eclamptic toxemia, yes. So these are the risk factors. We can be vigilant about the risk factors about the abruption. If, especially if patient previously have abruption, this is a very important risk factor. Smoking, cocaine, amphetamine use, these are all risk factors for abruption. Road traffic accident, domestic violence, these are all risk factors for abruption.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you. How about yeah, yeah. With regards placenta previa, let's say for example the mother has a previous history of placenta previa. Will this happen again in the future pregnancy, or what is the incidence of it, let's say, having again a placenta previa for the next pregnancies?
Yes, like if previous history of placenta previa, there is chance of recurrence of placenta previa. Exact incidence I don't know, but yes, if there is previous history of placenta previa, there is chance of recurrence of placenta previa. Increased risk of placenta
Yeah.
previa.
Okay. Thank you. The last the last condition that you have mentioned is with regards uterine rupture. I have in the last years of my rotation in OB, I've been hearing like, for example, your cesarean section, if you are a previously CS mother, subsequent CS would be a maximum of 3 or 4 pregnancies. I don't have any clear idea about this. And then because of the danger of uterine fracture of a series of cesarean section, how would you advise mothers about this possibility? If they are going to be pregnant, what would be the maximum number of pregnancies? And they are really have the clear indication that the next pregnancies would be cesarean section.
See, now we are promoting vaginal births after cesarean section. So, in case if patients are if patient have previous one cesarean section due to non-obstructive reasons, then we encourage her to go for vaginal birth after cesarean section. And we are explaining that the risk of uterine rupture is very minimal. The success rate of VBAC is about 74%, and failure rate is only 30 to 40%. And the risk of rupture is very rare, only 1 in 200 women. If only one previous cesarean section. But as number of cesarean section increase, the risk of rupture increase. So previous 2 or previous 3 cesarean section we are not very much encouraging. But if a patient already having one pressure, we are encouraging for the vaginal birth after cesarean section, VBAC. And the number of cesarean section, I will not comment on this thing because there are so many women who are having previous 3 cesarean, previous 4 cesarean section, 5 cesarean, even previous 6, 7 cesarean section. So some countries in Saudi Arabia, they are having previous 6 and 7 cesarean section. So I cannot comment how much is safe, but of course, as the number of cesarean section is increasing, the
Yeah.
chance is increasing. The risk of uterine rupture is increasing.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Are there any other questions? I think no more questions from the group. I thank you very much, Dr. Farkanda. I think that was a very complete, extensive lecture we had today. We had a very fruitful CME this morning. And I want to remind the group to answer the post-test and the evaluation forms and then submit it. Then I would like to thank everyone who joined today's meeting, and we welcome you for our future meetings. Dr. Farkanda, thank you very much and have a
Thank you
nice
very much.
day.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.